Can you go deeper into the other clients that you helped or other examples of where you've seen these reports really help someone?
Yeah, so another one would be a digestive issue. So this is an interesting one. Again, I have their permission because this is someone I know well. And they had stomach issues for a long, long time, and specifically stomach ulcers. And yet when I looked at their genetic reports, they didn't have a genetic tendency towards it. So, I never quite finished that point. So you can absolutely have a very high risk for something and not have it ever, or not have it for a long time. But what I wanted to say is you can also have the opposite. You can have a situation where you don't have a high genetic risk for something at all. Maybe you've got a normal risk for it, maybe you've got a low risk for it, but you still have the issue. What does that mean? So the way I would interpret that is this. Of course, you can still have the issue, but it just means that you don't have a genetic tendency towards it. And so therefore, I would say that's a good thing because it means it's easier to resolve. Like, this is a big one with allergies and intolerances, for instance, which are not impossible, but difficult to deal with. I know a lot of people who have been doing health stuff for a long time, highly committed, eat well, exercise well, live well, all the rest of it. And they still have allergies or they still have intolerances. It's a difficult thing to deal with. Some people manage it, but some people don't. And I think that's the distinction. If the allergy or intolerance is down to genetic factors, I believe that's where sometimes you can reduce the symptoms significantly, but they will never go away completely because they're kind of pre-programmed in a bit. Like we talked in the last episode about eye color, right? Eye color can change occasionally, but generally it's just the way it is, it's pre-programmed in. And so it's the same with allergies and intolerances, and it's the same with some of these chronic health issues as well, like, acid reflux or sinus congestion or, things like that, that they can just be, as soon as you're not perfect, they'll start showing up. And they're not, going to ruin your life and they're not going to kill you, but they're there. So the distinction is if the genetic report comes back and says you do not have a genetic tendency for it, that doesn't disprove the system. That's actually helpful information because it tells me, oh, I don't probably have a genetic component to this issue, and therefore it's probably going to be easier to resolve than if I had. So in this case with this person, that it didn't seem like that was the case because they've been struggling with stomach ulcers like at least 15 years, maybe 20, for a long time. Off and on, not constantly, but it was like a consistent thing that it kept showing up and they had to eat very carefully and all the rest of it. And so, when I looked for their reports, again, no tendency for maybe indigestion, but no tendency for stomach ulcers, no high risk of stomach ulcers, also no high risk for susceptibility to H. pylori, which is the bacteria that is a contributing factor. Like a lot of people have H. pylori without stomach ulcers. So that's one of those things that, you can't say it's a cause, but you could say it's a contributing factor. And so, but what there was a tendency for a lot of food allergies and intolerances back to that point. And there was also, we talked in the last episode about how we can tell you, should you be having high carbohydrate or low? Should you be having high fat or low? Should you be having high protein or low? Should you have high saturated fat or low? Because for some people it's good, People who talk about paleo, carnivore, usually keto, right? Eats lots of saturated fat. And then, people who are more plant-based are like, no, it's terrible, avoid it like the plague. And they both have a mountain of evidence to support their perspective. I would say, although I guess each side would not agree with that about the other. But my perspective is it's just about finding what is right for you since, discovering this genetic basis to so much. So anyway, in this person's case, they said they used to be the healthiest when they used to eat like this high carb and high protein diet and eat small meals regularly. And they were eating just mainly chicken and rice, like this very simple diet. And then they kind of got into health stuff and they started to eat all kinds of other stuff. They started to eat, salads and fruits and like a healthy, balanced, varied diet by any normal definition. And then also more healthy fats, more avocado, more olive oil, more, plant fats mainly, maybe eggs as well and stuff like that. So yeah, not saturated fat, the other kind. And they just were feeling worse and worse, but they didn't join the dots because they're eating a healthy diet now. This is the diet that everyone says is healthy, especially, back then when they first started. I mean, as I said, there's a bit more of a paleo, keto kind of fad at the moment, but back then it was definitely more of like a vegan, plant-based fad was in the alternative scene. And so that's what they've been doing for a long time, and they just never felt right. And then, so we pulled their reports, and it turned out they had a tendency to allergies and intolerances to a lot of foods, including things that were found in plants, like oxalates was one example. Oxalate is these tiny little crystals that are in a lot of plant foods, especially high in some things like spinach and chocolate and tea. And it turned out they loved spinach and they loved chocolate, and they ate it like a lot. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I said, again, I didn't, because this person had money. Now, in the case of if someone's broke, I would say just try not having those for a while. Elimination diet. We talk about that on the allergies and intolerances episode. That's already out. We can check that one out. You can check that one out to hear what I would do if I was in that position. But in this case, they had money. So I said, test, find out. It's not essential, but they could do it, and they wanted to do it. They needed to be convinced before they were going to change their diet from this so-called healthy diet that they've been eating for such a long time. And they get it back. And basically, most of the foods that they ate on a regular basis, they had this really, really high score for, that it was really bad for them and they were really intolerant to it. And also, in the genetic test, the other thing that came up is that fat was really bad for them. And it's funny because they were like, I never really gravitated. I just, always eating it. And they were like a big fat follower of Tony Robbins. And for years, Tony Robbins was talking about the, not keto, but like the high, like fat is the best fuel kind of thing, the best long lasting fuel. And so they were trying to eat this low fat, low carb diet for years and just always feeling bad with it. And so they switched to not eating any of the foods they're intolerant to, certainly including oxalate, and not eating much fat. And actually, but this is not a restrictive diet. This is really going back to the way that they ate naturally pretty much when they wanted to. Maybe reducing chocolate was a bit of a blow, but I mean, other than that, it was no big deal. And they just started to feel so much better, right? And you may say, well, okay, that's great, Owen. What the hell is that to do with stomach ulcers? Well, again, we don't quite know what causes a stomach ulcer, right? But as I say, H. pylori is a factor. But again, if you ask doctors, they say, well, inflammation. Okay. Well, and even stress. Stress used to be the thing that was blamed on stomach ulcers until they discovered H. pylori. And it's like, okay, well, what inflames the system? What stresses the system? Well, lots of things, right? As I've talked about in lots of the episodes and will continue to. But one of the things that really inflames the system is when you have a chronic immune reaction to foods that you're eating every meal, right? So that can be one of the things that completely undermines all your efforts to health. And it's so sad when this happens because literally, like, the person totally doesn't deserve it, right? It's not like they're smoking and drinking and, staying up all night partying, taking drugs and, or it's not like they're a couch potato sitting on the sofa eating a box of 12 donuts and a pizza. Like, they're exercising, they're eating the best diet, they're positive thinking and they're doing all of this stuff.
Yeah, they're technically doing everything right.
And then they end up in hospital, like, almost dying with a bleeding ulcer. It's terrible. And it's, and I relate to, obviously, something similar happened to me, which I talked about in a different episode, where I thought I was doing everything right and I ended up not in a life-threatening situation, but still really suffering. And so, yeah, like that's, and again, like if I'd just said to this person or if they'd have gone to some other practitioner, a nutritionist or whatever, and just said, you should cut out these foods, would it have been helpful? Maybe, right? Depending on the amount of authority that person had in their eyes. But it's like, how long do you stick to it? And how much do you stick to it, right? Because if you stick to a, reducing foods you're intolerant to 80% diet, you won't be that much better. You've really got to cut them out completely for the inflammation to start to calm down and subside, and for the stress response to start to calm down and get back to normal.
And how long do you think that is to really cut those out completely? For what period of time?
It's a good question. It totally depends on the person. It depends on it, it depends on so many factors, because it's like, how long does it take to calm down the immune system and the nervous system once it's completely overloaded? I can't say how long it'll take, but what I can say, the process won't start if you're doing something which it thinks is poisoning you every meal. That makes sense, right? If your whole system, your immune system and your nervous system is on high alert because it thinks the food is like a foreign invader, whether that's true or not, obviously it's not true, but that's how the immune system's treating it. That's what an allergy or an intolerance is. It's when you have an immune reaction to something as if it's a foreign invader. As long as that's what's going on, you're not going to be able to calm down. So I can't say how long it will take from the moment you start to be able to calm down, but what I can say is you won't really start to be able to calm down until you stop flooding your body of what it thinks is a poison. Because, we talked about me before and how my body had actually flooded by a poison, right? Like lead in my case, and mycotoxins as well to some degree, although that was less. But actually, as bad as that was, if your immune system thinks most of the food you're eating are like a virus or a bacteria that's out to kill you, it's almost worse. It almost explains how I would end up really sick, but they would end up almost dead in hospital because their body thought they're like eating lead all day. I mean, that's the equivalent. Like, it's really, really bad if that's what's going on. So yeah, I mean, I could go on, but it's another example of how it's really helpful to get that genetic information. I had another client who was really struggling to lose weight. That was their big thing. And in their case, they were following a ketogenic diet, and they were doing loads and loads of exercise, and they were exhausted, and from my mind, they were stressed, although they didn't think that they were. And they, felt that they were doing the right thing. They just didn't quite understand why it wasn't working. So we did their reports. It turns out they're someone who thrived on a high level of carbohydrates. They could handle carbohydrates quite well. And it wasn't that they did well on fat. Oh, yeah, it was that they didn't do very well on high protein. So they've been having this really high protein diet, which generally is a good thing. Like, for most people, if you want to lose weight, having more protein is good, because protein is the thing that your body really needs. It's satiating for that reason, far more than carbohydrate or fat. And yet we all have this different capacity to actually deal with everything, whether it's toxins, whether it's allergens, whether it's food, different types of macronutrients, all the rest of it. They did not have a very good capacity to deal with protein. And so for them, weirdly, getting it from really high protein to just a medium level of protein, plus getting the carbohydrates up, then allowed their system to actually be able to calm down. They still also needed some thyroid support, but that didn't come up in the genetic test. That came up in blood tests, which I managed to persuade them to get. And then, the weight just fell off, because if you find the right fuel for you, and your metabolism is running correctly, it's almost impossible to gain weight. It's not that difficult to build muscle, especially if you're a man and you have high testosterone. But for women especially, and this was women, it's really, really hard to gain weight if your metabolism is high and you're getting the right fuel for you, even if it's not super healthy. This is the crazy thing. Like, I can't handle simple sugars at all. Like, they completely mess me up. Even the ones that are supposed to be healthy, like, say, honey to some degree, according to most people. But this person, I think you have the same genetics, Chrissy, like, they could have simple sugars and be totally fine. Now, when I say totally fine, I mean, the keto people are probably screaming listening to this. I mean, totally fine compared to someone who can't handle it, right? I mean, very high amounts of, very refined sugar will eventually cause a problem to anyone. But it's how long does it take? How much can you handle before it becomes a problem? And how bad does the problem get? These are all the kind of variables, So for some people, they basically need to be on a ketogenic diet. Otherwise, they balloon in weight and develop diabetes. For other people, they're totally fine having a lot of carbs and even quite a lot of simple carbs. No problem, as long as they're otherwise living healthily and exercising and all the rest of it. Don't have high blood sugar. Don't really have an issue. So again, genetics just makes such a massive difference with that. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Rejuvenate podcast. If you want to watch the full episode that came from, just click on the link above. Or if you just want to watch our latest video, then click the link below. And make sure that you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you.